How could a frightened waitress serving coffee to German officers turn into their worst nightmare in less than 6 hours? What training transforms an ordinary woman into a weapon more dangerous than an entire platoon? Why did the Gestapo seal all records of October 12, 1944, and execute everyone who witnessed what happened in that basement? Today, we reveal the classified truth that remained buried in Allied intelligence archives for 70 years. This is the story of Claire Beaumont, a woman the Germans thought was a simple French waitress, a woman whose real identity would cost them everything, a woman who proved that the most dangerous weapon in war is the one your enemy never sees coming. They underestimated her because she smiled when she poured their coffee. They dismissed her because she spoke with a provincial accent and kept her eyes lowered. They made the fatal mistake of believing that a woman in an apron posed no threat. By the time they discovered who she really was, 12 of them were already dead. And she was just getting started. Before the occupation, before the war, before she learned 57 ways to kill a man with her bare hands, Claire Beaumont was exactly what she appeared to be. Born in 1919 in the village of Beaune in the Burgundy region of France, she grew up among vineyards and ancient churches. Her father owned a small cafe near the town square. Her mother taught at the local school. Claire herself dreamed of studying languages at the Sorbonne. She was fluent in French and German by age 16. She added English and Italian by 18. She loved poetry, classical music, and long walks through the countryside. The summer of 1939 changed everything. As war clouds gathered over Europe, Claire was finishing her studies in Paris. She had just been accepted to a prestigious translation program. Her future seemed bright and certain. Then Germany invaded Poland. France declared war. The world Claire knew began to crumble. But for 9 months, the so-called phony war gave France a false sense of security. Life continued almost normally in Paris. Students still attended lectures. Cafes remained open. People told themselves this war would be different. They were wrong. May 10, 1940. The German blitzkrieg smashed through the Ardennes. Within 6 weeks, France had fallen. The government fled. The armistice was signed. Nazi swastikas flew over the Arc de Triomphe. German soldiers marched down the Champs-Élysées. Claire watched from a cafe window as her world died. She was 21 years old. And in that moment, watching foreign troops occupy her beloved Paris, something inside her hardened into steel. She returned to Beaune. The Germans had established a regional headquarters in the old monastery outside town. Officers requisitioned the best hotels and restaurants. Her father's cafe became a regular stop for Wehrmacht personnel. Claire began working there, serving coffee and pastries to men in Feldgrau uniforms. She smiled politely. She practiced her German. She listened to everything they said. What the Germans didn't know was that Claire had made contact with the resistance. In September 1940, she passed her first intelligence report to a British agent. Information about troop movements, unit designations, supply routes. Small details that seemed insignificant. But British intelligence recognized something exceptional in her reports. They showed tactical awareness far beyond what an untrained civilian should possess. They demonstrated an analytical mind that could identify patterns. Most importantly, they revealed ice-cold nerve under pressure. In January 1941, a recruiter from the British Special Operations Executive made contact. The SOE was recruiting and training agents for sabotage and intelligence operations in occupied Europe. They needed people who could blend in, who spoke the languages, who had reasons to be in occupied territory, who possessed the psychological profile for deep cover work. Claire Beaumont checked every box. 2 weeks later, she was on a fishing boat, crossing the channel. Her new life was about to begin. The training was brutal. 6 months at various facilities across England and Scotland. Hand-to-hand combat, silent killing techniques, weapons training on every small arm used by Allied and Axis forces, explosives and sabotage, radio operation and cryptography, lock-picking and burglary, surveillance and counter-surveillance, interrogation resistance, how to maintain a cover identity under extreme stress, how to kill quickly and quietly with improvised weapons, how to escape from handcuffs, ropes, and locked rooms, how to recognize and exploit human psychology. Her instructors noted that Claire possessed unusual aptitude for combat techniques. Despite being 5'4" and weighing barely 110 pounds, she learned to use leverage and precision to neutralize much larger opponents. She excelled particularly at knife work and silent kills. Her instructor, a former Shanghai municipal police officer who had trained with Fairbairn and Sykes, wrote in his evaluation that she was one of the most naturally gifted students he had ever seen. Cold, controlled, and absolutely fearless. But it was in the darker arts where Claire truly distinguished herself. The training included what the instructors carefully called close work. Assassination. The curriculum covered dozens of methods, from poisons to staged accidents to direct action. Claire absorbed it all with clinical detachment. She asked precise technical questions. She practiced until every movement was automatic. When one instructor expressed concern about her psychological readiness for actual killing, Claire looked at him with eyes that had seen German troops march through her city and said simply, "My country is occupied. My people are suffering. If you're worried I'll hesitate, you're wasting your time." They parachuted her back into France in August 1941. Her cover was perfect because it was real. She returned to Beaune, to her father's cafe, to serving Germans their morning coffee. But now she carried secrets that could topple empires. She wore a radio operator's call sign stitched into the lining of her dress. She knew 47 dead-letter drops scattered across 3 departments. She could assemble a Sten gun blindfolded. She could break a man's neck in 2 seconds without making a sound. And she reported directly to London. For 3 years, Claire operated in the shadows. She passed intelligence that helped the Allies bomb German supply depots, intercept convoys, and target high-value officers. She organized sabotage operations that destroyed rail lines, factories, and fuel storage facilities. She coordinated with multiple resistance networks, serving as a vital link between local cells and Allied command. She killed 7 German soldiers and 3 milice collaborators in missions that looked like accidents, robberies, or partisan attacks. She did all this while serving coffee 6 days a week with a smile. The Germans never suspected. Why would they? She was just Claire, the friendly waitress who spoke German well and sometimes flirted mildly with junior officers. She laughed at their jokes. She commiserated about the cold winters and bad wine. She was part of the background, invisible in plain sight, the perfect spy. But in the summer of 1944, something changed. British intelligence had identified a high-value target, SS Sturmbannführer Klaus Richter, commander of counterintelligence operations for the entire Burgundy region. Richter had been devastatingly effective at crushing resistance networks. Dozens of agents had been captured, tortured, and executed. Safe houses were being raided with impossible accuracy. Someone was talking. And Richter was the spider at the center of the web. London wanted him dead. They wanted it to look like resistance action, not an SOE operation, and they wanted it done before the Allied invasion, expected within months. The mission came to Claire in a coded BBC radio broadcast on June 3, 1944. 3 days before D-Day, though she didn't know that yet. The message was clear. Eliminate Richter by any means necessary. No support available. Complete autonomy. Extreme prejudice authorized. Claire began surveillance immediately. Richter was careful, paranoid, and well protected. He varied his routes. He traveled with bodyguards. He never kept a regular schedule. But he had one weakness. Every Thursday afternoon, he attended a staff meeting at the monastery headquarters. The meeting lasted exactly 90 minutes. He always arrived punctually at 2 o'clock and departed at 3:30. And his staff car always stopped at her father's cafe afterward for coffee before the drive back to his office in Dijon. Claire planned meticulously. The timing had to be perfect. The method had to be untraceable. The aftermath had to point toward resistance action, not a sophisticated assassination. She spent 2 weeks preparing. She acquired a small vial of liquid nicotine, one of the deadliest poisons known, from a contact in the agricultural supply chain. Colorless, odorless, and nearly impossible to detect in autopsy. She practiced the pour 100 times, perfecting the motion that would drop 3 milliliters into a coffee cup in less than half a second, while appearing to simply serve a drink. She rehearsed her escape route until she could navigate it in the dark. She positioned emergency supplies at 3 locations. She said goodbye to her parents, though they didn't know it. Everything was ready. Thursday, June 8th, 1944. The Allied invasion had begun 2 days earlier, though few in Beaune knew details yet. German forces were reeling from the Normandy landings. Communications were chaotic. Officers were being reassigned rapidly. It was the perfect moment for chaos to hide an assassination. Claire arrived at the cafe at noon as usual. She wore her standard uniform, a simple black dress with white apron. Concealed in the hem of her apron were 2 lockpicks, a razor blade, and a small compass. In her shoe was a suicide pill, standard precautions for field agents. She expected to use none of them. At exactly 3:32, Richter's staff car pulled up outside. 2 bodyguards exited first, scanning the street. Richter emerged, impeccable in his SS uniform, death's head insignia glinting on his collar. Claire watched through the window. Her heart rate remained steady at 64 beats per minute. Her hands did not shake. She had killed before. She would kill again. This was simply another Thursday. Richter entered with his aide, an Obersturmführer named Weber. They took their usual table near the window. Claire approached with her most pleasant smile. "Good afternoon, Sturmbannführer." "The usual?" Her German was flawless, with just a hint of local French accent. Richter nodded absently, already discussing something with Weber about increased partisan activity. Claire returned to the counter, made 2 espressos, prepared a small jug of cream, and with a movement practiced 100 times, dropped 3 milliliters of colorless death into Richter's cup. The poison dispersed instantly, invisible, undetectable, fatal within 20 minutes. She served the coffee. Richter drank half the cup immediately. Claire retreated to the counter, began cleaning glasses, waited. Her training had taught her patience. How long a particular poison takes, what signs to watch for. Richter and Weber talked for 8 minutes about interrogation reports and suspected safe houses. Then Richter paused mid-sentence, frowned slightly, took another sip of coffee, grimaced, said something about the taste. Claire's pulse didn't change. Everything was proceeding normally. Then disaster struck. Not from the poison, from something completely unexpected. The door burst open. 3 Gestapo officers entered at speed, weapons drawn. The lead officer, a Hauptsturmführer Claire didn't recognize, pointed directly at Richter. "Sturmbannführer Klaus Richter, you are under arrest for treason against the Reich." The cafe froze. Richter stood slowly, face pale. "This is absurd. I am SS intelligence. You have no authority." The Gestapo officer smiled coldly. We have authority from Berlin. We have evidence of your communication with British intelligence. We have your code names. You are a traitor. You will come with us now." Claire's mind raced. This was impossible. Richter was their target because he was devastatingly effective against the resistance. He couldn't be a double agent. Unless British intelligence had been running a triple game. Unless they had sacrificed their own asset to protect a deeper penetration. Unless Claire had just poisoned someone who was actually working for the Allies. But there was no time for analysis. Because at that moment, Weber made a fatal mistake. He reached for his pistol. The Gestapo officers opened fire instantly. Weber went down with 3 bullets in his chest. Richter dove behind the table. The bodyguards outside heard shooting and crashed through the door, weapons raised. More shots. 1 bodyguard fell. The second killed a Gestapo officer before taking a round to the head. Customers screamed and scattered. Claire's father dropped behind the counter. And in the chaos, the Gestapo Hauptsturmführer turned, and his eyes locked on Claire. She saw his expression change, saw recognition, saw understanding. And in that instant, she knew. Somehow he knew. Maybe her cover had been burned. Maybe they had found her radio. Maybe someone had talked under torture. The reason didn't matter. What mattered was the Hauptsturmführer raising his pistol and shouting, "The waitress! She is British agent! Take her!" Claire moved. Training took over. Conscious thought shut down. She grabbed the espresso machine's metal pitcher, scalding hot, and hurled it at the nearest Gestapo officer. It struck his face. He screamed. She vaulted the counter, seized her father's wine bottle from the shelf, smashed it, and drove the jagged edge into the throat of the second officer as he turned. Blood sprayed. She dropped and rolled as bullets shattered bottles above her. Came up with the dead officer's Walter P-38 pistol, fired twice. The Hauptsturmführer went down clutching his stomach. The remaining bodyguard had his weapon trained on her. Claire dove behind the counter as he fired. Wood splinters exploded. She heard her father shouting, heard German voices outside, heard vehicles arriving. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the entire German garrison descended on this building. The mission had gone catastrophically wrong. Richter was dying from poison on the cafe floor. The Gestapo knew her identity, and she was trapped. She did the only thing possible. She ran. Through the kitchen, out the back door, into the service alley. Behind her, whistles blew, orders shouted, boots pounded. She sprinted through narrow medieval streets she had known since childhood. Right on Rue des Tonneliers, left through the covered market, down to the old river wall. She could hear vehicles now, spreading through the quarter. Dogs barking. They were sealing the district. Claire's safe house was 8 blocks away. She would never make it. Her emergency cache was in the cemetery, 4 blocks in the opposite direction. Also impossible. Every training scenario had covered dozens of contingencies, but none had anticipated this. Blown cover, hot pursuit, 0 support. She needed to disappear, needed time to think, needed somewhere they would never expect. She ducked into a doorway, stripped off her apron, reversed her dress, a simple trick but effective, changing her silhouette, tied her hair differently, smeared dirt on her face. Then she walked, not ran, toward the one place they might not search immediately. The monastery, the German headquarters itself. It was insane. But insanity has its own logic. The Germans would expect her to run for the countryside, to seek the resistance. They would set roadblocks. They would search known safe houses. They would sweep the obvious routes. But walking into their own headquarters? That required either stupidity or brilliance. Claire was betting on the latter. She approached from the service entrance. Delivery vehicles came and went constantly. She waited until a bakery truck passed the checkpoint. Slipped behind it. Walked with purpose, head down, like she belonged. A guard glanced at her. She was just another French woman, another servant, another piece of furniture. She entered through the kitchen, found a storage room, locked herself in a closet full of cleaning supplies, and there, in absolute darkness, she finally allowed herself to think. The situation was catastrophic. Her cover was burned. The Gestapo knew her identity. They would be searching every building in Beaune. They would question everyone who knew her. Her family was in immediate danger. Her network was compromised. And she was locked in a closet in the heart of enemy headquarters with no weapon, no radio, and no extraction plan. But she was alive. And as long as she was alive, she was dangerous. Claire assessed her resources. She had her clothes. She had 2 lockpicks in her hem, somehow miraculously still there. She had her training. She had her mind. And she had one advantage they didn't know about. She spoke perfect German. She knew the layout of this building from 3 years of intelligence gathering. And she understood military psychology. Germans respected order and authority. If she could acquire a uniform, create a plausible identity, she could move through this building like a ghost. They would be searching for a fleeing French waitress. They would never expect a German auxiliary worker calmly doing her job. But first, she needed to know what was happening. She needed information. She waited 2 hours in that closet, listening. Heard soldiers moving through the halls. Heard orders being shouted. Heard vehicles departing and arriving. Gradually, the chaos subsided into routine. That was when she moved. She picked the lock with one of her stolen tools. It took 45 seconds, emerged into an empty corridor, walked calmly to the staff bathroom, washed her face, straightened her hair, found a staff room. Inside were spare uniforms for kitchen workers. She changed into gray worker's dress, added a cleaning apron, picked up a bucket and mop, became invisible again. For the next 3 hours, Claire moved through the monastery like a maintenance worker. She emptied trash cans. She mopped floors. She was part of the building's background, beneath notice. And she gathered intelligence. She learned that the entire district was sealed. Roadblocks at every exit. House-to-house searches underway. Her description circulated to every unit. Shoot-on-sight orders issued. The Gestapo was furious. The SS was demanding answers. And most importantly, she learned that they were bringing in prisoners for interrogation. Suspects. Anyone connected to her. Anyone who might know where she would run. They brought in her father at 7 o'clock that evening. Claire was mopping the corridor outside the interrogation rooms when they dragged him past. He looked terrified. Beaten already. They threw him into a cell. Claire's hands tightened on the mop handle. She kept her face blank, kept moving. But inside, fury ignited. These were the men who had occupied her country, who had killed her friends, who had destroyed her life, and now they had her father. That night, Claire made her decision. She couldn't escape, not yet. The lockdown was too complete. But she could do something else, something they would never expect. She could go on the offensive. She was trapped inside their headquarters with dozens of Germans who thought she was 100 miles away by now. They were vulnerable, unprepared, complacent, and she was very, very good at killing. She began planning. The monastery had approximately 40 personnel. 15 were permanent staff, officers, and administrators. 20 were guards rotating in 8-hour shifts. 5 were support personnel, cooks and cleaners. There were also prisoners now, though she didn't know how many. The building was a maze of corridors, cells, offices, and quarters. It had 3 floors plus a basement that served as the detention area. There were 4 entrances, all guarded. Windows were barred. Communication was by telephone and radio, not runners. Claire identified her advantages. She could move freely as a cleaner. She had access to most areas. She knew the building layout. She spoke the language perfectly. And most critically, they didn't know she was inside. Her plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. She would systematically eliminate key personnel, sow chaos, and create an opportunity to both free her father and escape in the confusion. It was desperate. It was dangerous. It was probably suicidal. But she had run out of better options. She started in the kitchen. At 2 a.m, the facility was quiet. Only night guards were awake. Claire entered the kitchen using her stolen keys. She needed weapons first. She found chef's knives, found a steel meat tenderizer, found a bottle of industrial cleaning ammonia, found matches and kerosene for the lamps. She created a crude but effective arsenal. She hid the items in her cleaning cart. Then she went hunting. Her first target was the guard posted at the basement stairs. A young soldier, barely 20, leaning against the wall half asleep. Claire approached with her mop bucket, eyes downcast, harmless. The soldier barely glanced at her. She passed him, turned, and drove the 8-inch kitchen knife into the base of his skull with surgical precision. He died instantly, silently. She caught his body, dragged him into a storage closet, took his keys, his pistol, and his rifle. Now she was armed. Her second target was the radio room on the second floor. 2 operators, both awake, but focused on their equipment. Claire entered as the cleaning woman. They ignored her. She positioned herself between them and began dusting. Then, in one fluid motion, she drew the stolen pistol and fired twice. Point-blank range. Heads. Both operators dead before they understood what was happening. She destroyed the radio equipment with the rifle butt, cut all telephone lines. The monastery was now deaf and mute. No calls for reinforcement. No warnings sent. Her third target was the officer quarters, 4 rooms housing senior staff. She moved from door to door, picked each lock, entered silently, found men sleeping, and killed them with the knife before they could wake. Throats cut. Quick. Clean. Professional. One officer woke as she entered, reached for his pistol. She was faster. The blade took him through the eye. He gurgled once and died. By 3:30 a.m, 7 Germans were dead. And no one knew. Anything was wrong. But Claire understood she was running out of time. The 4 o'clock guard change would reveal the bodies. She needed to accelerate. She moved to the detention area, found the guard station. 2 soldiers playing cards. She opened the door. They looked up, saw a cleaning woman, saw no threat. Fatal mistake. She shot them both before they could speak. The suppressed pistol she had taken from an officer made 2 soft coughs. Both guards collapsed. She took their keys and moved down the cell corridor. There were 6 cells. 5 prisoners, all Frenchmen from the district. And her father. He looked up as she opened his door. His eyes widened. "Claire? My God, what are you—" She put a finger to his lips, whispered in rapid French, "No time. Can you walk?" He nodded. She freed the other prisoners, gave them the guards' weapons, told them the situation. "This building is full of Germans. We need to fight our way out. If you want to live, follow me exactly." The men, desperate and angry, agreed instantly. Claire led them back upstairs. By now she estimated another 15 Germans were dead or incapacitated. That left approximately 25, including the perimeter guards. The odds were still terrible, but she had surprise, momentum, and nothing to lose. She positioned her small group in the central hallway, gave them their instructions. Then she set the kerosene fires she had prepared in 3 locations. Within minutes, smoke filled the upper floors. Alarms rang. Germans poured from their rooms, confused, disoriented. The ambush was devastating. Claire and her fighters opened fire from cover. The Germans, caught in narrow corridors, died in the crossfire. Some returned fire wildly, others tried to flee. Claire moved through the smoke like a vengeful spirit, shooting, stabbing, killing. A German officer charged her with a bayonet. She sidestepped, took his weapon, broke his knee with the rifle butt, and shot him as he fell. An NCO tackled her from behind. She drove her head back into his nose, spun, and cut his throat with the knife. Blood covered her. Gunpowder burned her lungs, and she kept moving. The perimeter guards, hearing the chaos inside, abandoned their posts to investigate. Huge mistake. It opened the main entrance. Claire's group fought through the ground floor, left a trail of bodies, reached the courtyard. The remaining Germans rallied near the gate, formed a defensive line. Claire counted 8 soldiers with rifles. Behind her, she had her father and 4 prisoners, all armed but exhausted. The gate was 30 meters away, 30 meters of open ground under direct fire. Suicide. But surrender was not an option. Claire grabbed 2 stick grenades from a dead soldier. She looked at her companions, saw exhaustion, fear, but also grim determination. She said simply, "For France." They nodded. She pulled the pin on the first grenade, threw it high. It arced toward the German line. They scattered. The explosion tore 3 of them apart. She threw the second grenade. More screams. Then she screamed, "Run!" and charged. They sprinted across the courtyard. The remaining Germans fired. Bullets cracked past Claire's head. 1 prisoner fell. Another took a round to the shoulder but kept moving. Claire fired as she ran, not aiming, just suppressing. The Germans dove for cover, and in that split second, the group reached the gate, through, into the street, into darkness. Behind them, the monastery burned. Smoke poured from windows. Bodies littered every floor. Of the 40 Germans who had occupied that building, 34 were dead. The rest were wounded, scattered, and broken. It was the most devastating single-agent operation in SOE history, and Claire Beaumont had done it with kitchen knives, stolen weapons, and absolute determination. But she wasn't done. Not yet. Because she knew what would happen next. The Germans would seal the entire region. They would hunt her with everything they had. They would kill anyone suspected of helping her. She couldn't hide in bone anymore. She couldn't endanger the local population. She needed to reach the resistance in the mountains, 40 kilometers northeast, through German patrols, with her wounded, exhausted group, in darkness. They moved fast, through vineyards and forest paths Claire had known since childhood. Behind them, sirens wailed. Vehicles raced through streets. Searchlights swept the darkness. The Germans were deploying everything. Wehrmacht, SS, milice collaborators. Hundreds of men searching for a single woman who had just killed 34 of their comrades. By dawn, Claire's group had covered 12 kilometers. They hid in a barn outside a small village. The wounded prisoner was failing. He had lost too much blood. Claire did what she could with field dressings, but he needed a doctor. One of the farmers, risking everything, provided food and water, gave them intelligence about German movements. 2 columns were searching the area, roadblocks on every major route, planes overhead. The noose was tightening. Claire made a decision. She would split the group. Her father and the wounded man would hide here. The remaining prisoners would scatter, each taking a different direction, creating false trails. Claire herself would continue alone toward the resistance, draw German attention, lead them away from the civilians. It was the only way to give everyone else a chance. Her father protested. "Claire, you can't. They will kill you." She smiled. For the first time in days, she smiled. "Papa, I have killed 34 Germans in 6 hours. I am very hard to kill." She kissed his forehead. "Go to your sister in Lyon when it's safe. Tell her I love her. Tell her I regret nothing." Then she was gone, disappearing into the morning mist like a ghost. For the next 3 days, Claire led German forces on a running battle across the Burgundy countryside. She sabotaged their vehicles. She sniped their patrols from long range. She set booby traps that killed and maimed. She was everywhere and nowhere. The Germans poured 1,000 men into the search. They found nothing but bodies and burned vehicles. The waitress who had served them coffee had become their worst nightmare. On the 4th day, she reached the resistance, a Maquis group operating from the Morvan Mountains. They almost shot her when she emerged from the forest, thinking she was a German infiltrator. But when she gave the recognition code, when she told them what had happened in Beaune, they stared in disbelief. The story was already legend. The Monastery Massacre, they were calling it. The Germans had put 100,000 franc bounty on her head, and here she was, alive, asking for a radio to contact London. The resistance commander, a former French army captain named Dubois, provided everything she needed. Claire sent her after-action report via encrypted transmission, requested extraction, requested new identity and placement, requested permission to continue operations. London's response came within 12 hours. Immediate extraction denied. Too dangerous. But new assignment approved. Claire would remain in France. She would work with the resistance coordinating operations until the liberation, and she would be promoted to major in recognition of her actions. Claire operated in the Morvan for the next 3 months. She trained resistance fighters in SOE techniques. She planned ambushes and sabotage operations. She killed 17 more Germans in various actions. She became a legend among the Maquis, the British woman who had destroyed an entire headquarters alone. They called her La Fantôme, the ghost, but the Germans had not forgotten. SS Brigade Führer Heinz Müller, the new commander of counterintelligence for the region, made her capture his personal priority. He assigned his best hunters to the task. He offered massive rewards. He studied her patterns, her methods, her psychology, and slowly, he closed in. September 3rd, 1944. Allied forces were driving across France. The liberation was coming. The Germans were in full retreat. But Müller had one last chance to capture his prize. His agents had identified the resistance camp in the Morvan. They knew Claire was there. He assembled a strike force, 200 SS troops, heavy weapons, armored cars. At dawn, they surrounded the camp, and they attacked. The battle lasted 4 hours. The resistance fought desperately. Claire organized the defense, moving between positions, directing fire, killing Germans at close range. But the outcome was never in doubt. The SS had overwhelming firepower. One by one, the resistance positions fell. Claire and 12 survivors made a final stand in a stone farmhouse. They held for 30 minutes. Then the SS brought up a flamethrower. The choice was burn or surrender. Claire chose neither. She gathered her remaining fighters, told them the plan. It was insane. But so was everything else she had done. When the Germans stormed the burning building, expecting to find corpses, they found an empty room and a hole in the floor. The cellar. The escape tunnel that Claire had insisted they dig weeks earlier. The tunnel that led 200 meters to a ravine. By the time the SS realized what happened, Claire and her people were gone. They ran through the forest. The Germans pursued. Müller himself led the chase, obsessed now, consumed by the need to catch this woman who had humiliated him. His troops fanned out. Dogs tracked the scent. Aircraft circled overhead. The net closed. At a river crossing, the SS caught up. Final confrontation. 7 resistance fighters against 40 SS troops. No escape possible. No quarter expected. Claire stood at the riverbank. Behind her, swollen waters. Before her, SS soldiers advancing with weapons raised. Müller himself emerged from the line, called to her in German, "Major Beaumont, we know who you are. We know what you have done. Surrender now and you will be treated as a prisoner of war. Fight, and you will die here." Claire looked at him, at the SS troops, at the sky, and she laughed. It was a sound that chilled every man present. Laughter without humor, without fear, the laughter of someone who had already won. She raised her voice. "Herr Brigadeführer, you offer terms? You who have murdered millions? You who have destroyed nations? Let me tell you something about surrender." And then she did something none of them expected. She dropped her weapon, raised her hands, walked toward them slowly. The SS soldiers lowered their rifles slightly, confused. Müller smiled, thinking he had broken her. Claire walked right up to him, stood 1 meter away, looked him in the eyes, and whispered in perfect German, "You already lost this war. You just don't know it yet." Then she moved, faster than thought, faster than reaction. She pulled the concealed knife from her sleeve, the one she always carried, the one that had killed 37 Germans, and she drove it into Müller's throat. He staggered, clutched at the wound. Blood pumped between his fingers. Claire turned and dove into the river. Bullets churned the water. The current seized her, pulled her downstream. The SS fired until she disappeared around a bend. They searched the river for 3 kilometers. Found nothing. Assumed she had drowned. They were wrong. Claire had swum underwater for 50 meters, had pulled herself onto the far bank, had disappeared into the forest. And 2 days later, she walked into an American patrol advancing from the west. The war, for her, was over. At least the shooting part. The aftermath was classified for decades. Claire Beaumont received the George Cross, the Distinguished Service Cross, and the French Croix de Guerre. The citations were sealed. Her true identity was never revealed publicly. The Germans she killed, the operations she ran, the chaos she created behind enemy lines, all of it buried in intelligence archives. She was too valuable an asset to expose. After the war, Claire returned to England. She worked for British intelligence throughout the Cold War. She trained new generations of agents in the techniques she had perfected. She never married, never had children, never spoke publicly about what she had done. When asked about the war, she would say simply, "I did my duty." She died in 2003 at age 84. Her obituary in the Times mentioned nothing about her wartime service, just that she had been a civil servant, a translator, a quiet woman who loved poetry and classical music. The people at her funeral had no idea that the elderly lady they were burying had killed 53 Germans, destroyed an enemy headquarters single-handedly, and become a legend among Allied intelligence services. But in the secret archives, in the classified files that won't be opened for another 50 years, her story lives on. Every intelligence officer who reads it understands they are looking at something extraordinary, not just because of what she did, but because of what she represented. Proof that courage has no gender. That size means nothing against skill and determination. That the most dangerous weapon in any war is not technology or numbers, but the human will to fight. The Germans who captured a simple waitress that day in October 1944 learned this lesson far too late. They dismissed her because she served coffee. They underestimated her because she smiled politely. They made the fatal error of judging her by her appearance rather than her capabilities. And they paid the price. 34 of them dead in one night. 53 total over the course of the war. All killed by a woman who stood 5'4" and weighed barely 110 pounds. A woman who proved that deadliness comes in all forms, and sometimes it comes wearing an apron. As for Brigadeführer Heinz Müller, he survived Claire's attack. The knife wound required surgery but was not fatal. He spent the rest of the war obsessed with capturing her. He never did. When the Americans captured him in May 1945, they found an entire filing cabinet dedicated to tracking Claire Beaumont. Maps, reports, photographs, analysis. He had assembled more intelligence on her than on any other Allied agent. When interrogators asked why, he said simply, "Because she was the most dangerous enemy I ever faced." At his war crimes trial in 1947, Mueller was convicted of multiple atrocities. But the prosecuting attorney also asked him about Beaune, about the monastery, about the waitress who destroyed his headquarters. Mueller sat silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. His words were entered into the permanent court record. "I have commanded troops in Poland, Russia, France. I have fought partisans, armies, resistance fighters. I have seen courage and I have seen cowardice. But I have never, in all my years of war, encountered anyone like Claire Beaumont. She was not human. She was wrath itself, given form. If Germany had produced 10 like her, we would have won the war. Thank God for the Allies that she was unique." The court sentenced him to death. He was hanged in December 1947. Some say his last words were in French, a language he had learned during the occupation, a language forever associated in his mind with the woman who had defeated him. He whispered, "Je suis désolé. I am sorry." Whether he was apologizing to his victims or acknowledging his failure to capture Claire, no one knows. The executioner pulled the lever before anyone could ask. Today, there is no monument to Claire Beaumont, no plaque in Beaune marking what happened that October night, no museum exhibition telling her story. The French government, respecting British intelligence requests, has kept her identity classified. The monastery where 34 Germans died is now a cultural center. Tourists visit without knowing its history. The cafe where it all began is still operating, run by Claire's niece, who knows nothing of her aunt's wartime activities. But in the intelligence communities of a dozen nations, Claire Beaumont is studied. Her techniques are analyzed. Her operations are taught as case studies in improvisation and determination. Young officers learn about the monastery massacre, about the woman who fought her way through an occupied building and emerged victorious, about the agent who turned being underestimated into the most devastating weapon of all. And sometimes, on quiet evenings in the training centers, where new agents learn the dark arts of espionage and warfare, instructors tell the story of the waitress, the one who smiled while she served coffee, the one the Germans thought was harmless, the one who proved that in war, the most dangerous enemy is often the one you never see coming until it's far too late. None forgotten. Nothing forgotten. Claire Beaumont. Major, Special Operations Executive, the Ghost, the waitress who became legend, the woman who proved that courage knows no limits and skill trumps everything. Eternal honor to those who fight in shadows. Eternal memory to those who saved the world while the world never knew their names. And to every person who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or ignored because of how they looked or what they did, remember this. Claire Beaumont served coffee for breakfast and killed 34 enemies before sunset. Never judge a book by its cover, because sometimes the book fights back, and sometimes it wins.